Hey everyone, Jordan here with Food Bevy and excited to join today's Ask an Expert session all around staffing for success, strategies for early stage CPG brands to hire, when to do so, how, where, and why. And so one thing that I've experienced just in my time running T-Squares and other businesses is that when you're starting out as a 1, 2, 3 person team, you are doing all parts of the business. And at a certain point, you get stretched thin and you wonder, I need help. Where do I find it? At what level? And how do I go about doing so in a way that is supportive of the business and also in a way that can help us grow so I don't have regrets kind of later on. So for this conversation, I've invited on Mark and David to really talk through the decisions that you need to make as you are growing and how to go about doing so. And I also let them know, right, like we have brands of all sizes from early stage brands who are just starting out to those with a couple employees and growing. And so we'll make this relevant for each of us. One thing today with our format, we'll open up with some introductions to everyone to start, or to our guests. And then we'll also have an opportunity for Q&A for you and our audience. And so what I'd like you to do is write your questions in the chat that you have. You can have multiple questions, there's no limit. And then what I'll do is invite you to come up and ask that question to Mark and David directly. That way you can get firsthand answers to anything that you want to ask. So at this time, I'd like to invite David first to give just a quick introduction so that everyone has some context of the work that he does.
Right. Hello, I'm David Pelhees from JPG Resources, which is a food consultancy. Been around about 15 years supporting clients from idea to store shelf in developing ideas in food. I've been in the food business about 25 years at small companies, large companies, in operations and innovation. Have had the opportunity to participate in a number of methods for hiring folks, had the opportunity to participate in a number of reorganizations. So determining how to structure an organization and assess people and put them in the right places. So by virtue of that, I get to lead JPG Talent at JPG, where we help growing organizations in large part plug in the right resources for growth or for where they're at in their business stage.
Excellent. Thanks, David. And Mark?
Hi, I'm Mark Sandler. Thank you for having me, by the way, Jordan. I am managing partner of Transcend Executives, Transcend Search Partners, and we're an executive search firm focusing on hiring key talent for the food and beverage, ag, and manufacturing sectors. And we approach verticals, sales, commercial, finance and operations, and of course, senior leadership as well. My background is I've been a founder my entire career. I've been in executive search for about 3 years, but I know firsthand what it's like to start a business. And I've done it a couple times. The first business I started was a furniture business, not a food business. After my father died suddenly, and he just started it. So I really took that over really weeks after he started it and built that and sold that. Then I started from the ground up a food business because my son Benjamin was born with life-threatening food allergies. So we started and built a allergy-free type baked goods business where I had to build a special facility, dealt with supply chain, manufacturing, sale. But let me tell you, the first month or two or three, I was packing up the boxes, wrapping the cookies in the flow wrapper, and now I'm on the board of that company. So really what I do, my approach to executive search is I know firsthand what people go through and I help them assess the true talent that they need. And hopefully I can be helpful to you today.
Excellent, Mark and David. So starting off with a little bit of a broad question, how should our founders who are listening to this call think about hiring? If they're 1, 2, 3 person teams, maybe co-founders looking to hire their first or second actual employee, what are some of the considerations that they need to think about?
Well, I think, first, like you said, with a smaller team that has a broad range of responsibilities, that's assumed. But when those leaders or founders are finding that they're spending their time working those details rather than, the main things for an early growth company, right? Or customer relationships, growing sales more than last year, talking with investors, right, about raising money to support the growth of that business. If they're getting too far, if that's being put second versus trying to, answer a customer complaint or place a PO, then I think that's the time to bring on somebody so that the leaders can lead and drive the strategic.
And my input on that is that it really would be helpful to have a business plan. And it doesn't have to be an onerous formal plan. It can be something that is a sketch. But I think that if you create a roadmap for yourself, that roadmap, first of all, will be helpful when you do, or if you want to raise money, but it will help you sort of organize your hiring plan. Hey, I'm ready at this point to hire, or I'm not tracking to where I want to go. Just as David said, David mentioned, I'm getting waylaid, so I'm behind in my plan. And so a plan of some magnitude over a period of time will be the roadmap on a lot of these decisions, hopefully we're going to talk about today.
In thinking about that, I know one of the first questions that comes up with people bringing in and saying, hey, I need help, but I don't quite have the money to pay someone their full market rate. And founders will look at maybe bringing them on as a quote co-founder in exchange for equity and maybe some partial salary along with that. Do you have any experience with that and any pros and cons that might happen?
David,
Yeah, I've
yeah.
been involved in that situation, and the carrot of the big payday with the equity is a way to get highly experienced talent into a very emerging corporation, right? Somebody with an expectation of a high salary. I think the risk there is, in the details of, locking that person up for a certain number of years and, investment, etc. I think another alternative to that is, these fractional C-level folks that are out there, right? That, have the 20, 30 years experience and are just looking for that challenging situation on a fractional or interim basis, and you don't have to lock them up with some equity carrot, which is really kind of getting harder to do over the last year.
I think there are plenty of people out there that love to be able to help shape an organization, to be creative, to not have a lot of red tape and deal directly with founders. So you really have an advantage. I mean, there are disadvantages and there are advantages to anything in life, but you want someone that enjoys the creativity and the ability to help shape their future. And you want that person that's pining for that. And long-term incentives are helpful. They sound like you don't want to give stock away. They could be vested, as David mentioned. They could be done incrementally over time. But you have a lot to sell in your passion that you're creating at this time. And a lot of people, and you have to screen for that, right? You have to make sure the person wants that and historically has done that in the past. By the way, it's very important to have someone that really has actually dealt with a business your size before or close to your size before. But I would encourage you to think of yourself as your advantages, not your disadvantages.
I mean, along with that, how do you recommend in terms of hiring for experience, skill, or attitude or aptitude to learn on the job? Let's say for building a business that's doing maybe $500,000, $1 million, $2 million is kind of on the growth path, but not big enough to attract someone who's a senior leader and has lots of experience?
Well, my personal, point of view is you do have to hire for the skill. When you are a smaller organization, like you were talking about, like we've been talking about, and the leaders need to, work the strategic, they don't have time to train somebody up. And so in that circumstance, I would hire above and let the business come to the level of the resource, the employee, whichever it happens to be, just so that the leader, the founder, is not again being waylaid by the need to train. And with respect to, I think you mentioned something about attitude. I think I would maybe flip that or turn that word into culture. I mean, there has to be, you know, at least some semblance of a culture fit. Um, and I think if it's a permanent hire, it needs to be a really good culture fit. If it is considered to be a fractional interim thing, I think there's uh, some elements of culture that have to be checked on, but it's not as important because it's not a do or die situation in the interim or fractional space.
Yeah, and
This-
David, I want to dive into something a little bit that you mentioned as well, because you mentioned the difference between like hiring someone full time versus hiring like fractional or part time. Can you share maybe some of the pros and the cons of how founders might think about that early on to attract that skill level without having to invest in that as a full time resource?
Well, I think Mark hit it at it in a previous answer that there are folks out there truly interested in, providing their decades of experience to emerging companies, right? That's one of the things that charges them up. There was a Korn Ferry report last year that said the gig economy is stronger than it's ever been. And our anecdotal, you know, evidence that JPG supports that because we do have these, fractional C-level people that, you know, they're at that point in their career, they don't have to they don't have to climb the corporate ladder anymore, but they like the excitement of, that tough solve in that emerging brand, whether it be, how do we commercialize this? How do we get that next sale? That the chase is what they're after. And so you can hook them up for 10 to 30 hours a week, save some money against your budget, but tap into that, that high performer that can just step in to a situation.
No, that makes a lot of
If I
sense.
may, I would like to get a little, I think, get a little more granular on this because first of all, skills and attitude to skills and culture, it's like 1A and 1B, right? You have to have both, period. It's not an or situation. And then hiring ahead, like it's all a matter of degree, right? You want, and the plan, getting back to the plan helps because it'll paint a picture of how fast you're growing so you can see this person growing into their role over what, 10 years, 6 months, or 3 years, or whatever. So you want to have the experience, but you don't, if you're planning on being, a $3 million business over 5 years, you don't necessarily want someone on a day-to-day basis having experience at 200 million with that. You kind of have to look at the experience, and what we do and is screen for the history of those folks' experiences to see, have you had a situation where you've had adversity? Have you had a situation where you didn't have resources, and how have you handled that? So maybe they've arrived at a big job, a larger company, but they need to have this resourcefulness, this agility, team building skills, and it has to be not too big and not too small. So those are when I work with clients, we actually have an assessment done where we actually define the level of skills and look at the plan and actually hone in on that match exactly. So you just don't want to hire too high, but you want to hire, as David said, higher. so that you have the benefit of not being burdened with training too heavily.
No, Mark, and on that, I'm curious about the people that you are working with and interviewing in the market now, because do you see a disconnect between the ability for a single person to have both the experience, I think, on a strategic level and be willing to execute on like the day-to-day for the business? Do you see that gap widening? Is it shortening? Are those people also willing to go back and do the hands-on work? Or I'm curious what your perspective is.
Well, I mean, it's all different. I mean, not to
Yeah.
dodge the question, but it varies on the person, right? So my job is to screen, to disarm the person, to be honest with the person, and go. What I do is I ask them for specific examples of how they've handled situations and get their actual direct, honest response. And and I have to assess, and I would work with founders to assess if they were resourceful 25 years ago and they haven't been resourceful then, are they ready to do that or not? So, it's an in-depth screening process. It's very psychologically based and skill based. So there is no one size fits all here answer to this. It's the individual and their journey. And so I do a deep immersion with these candidates on a very intimate level, and I get to know them of what they're craving, why, what have they liked in the past, what they haven't. It's quite in depth. So there's no general trend. Sometimes when people are running a large company for a long time, they want to be resourceful, but they're used to all the structure and they don't realize that it's gone. And when you're one person doing 25 things, they kind of forgot how challenging that could be. So you want someone that really didn't forget, that they actually, instead of tolerating the lack of resources, you want someone that enjoys that they're doing it and they're being creative. There's a difference between tolerating and enjoying.
I think that's a great perspective. It reminds me of a person that I knew who was an executive at Pepsi a while back, and he took a job to actually be the CEO of a small-ish company. I think they were maybe doing a little bit under $1 million at the time. And he's saying, at Pepsi, I'd pick up the phone call and call a buyer and say, "Hey, we're at Pepsi." They take the call. And as the CEO of this small company that no one heard of, you could barely get an email reply back because they had no notoriety or awareness or track record or relationships really at that level. And so, that's why it was an eye-opening moment where he was in charge of that brand, loving it, but realized like, wow, like that is really draining. I thought I could do it and I thought I would like it, but it was like starting back at ground, maybe not the ground level, but like the first floor.
I remember when I started my company Divvies, and I was trying to set up UPS for shipping direct to consumer, and I couldn't get UPS to respond to me. So the only way I could do is to be nice and to be kind and to have a sense of humor and to have multiple calls just to get the person to respond. So this is all normal, but good screening, good upfront work saves everything. It saves all the energy and the failure rate, frankly.
We mentioned culture fit a couple of times. I'm curious, maybe we can start with David. Like, how do you think about assessing if someone's a good culture fit before making that investment where they are in the business, full time, right? If you give them an offer and they come in, and then you kind of find out they're a fit versus, do you recommend doing like project-based work, fractional work beforehand to really get to know them, to see how much they're a fit?
I think that's, an option, and we kind of do use the try before you buy type phraseology. But like I hinted at previously, I think even in the fractional or interim situation, you want to test for the culture fit. And, I think it's a matter of, Mark does very in-depth research in matching the fit. In the fractional basis, it's not as in-depth because it doesn't need to be, but nonetheless, we vet the folks that we put into companies, and then I think they often do, want to talk with the candidates. And I think leaders, founders, people hiring need to at least ask them a few questions that are relative to the work, but have that teamwork, collaboration component, so that the person needs to go through what was the situation, describe what their behavior was within that situation, what's the result, which in some cases may have been a bad business result, but they showed a great empathy for their team. They revealed who they were in the process, and with just a couple questions, you can determine if a person is going to mesh with your team, because that in the end is going to be very important.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
And my
Go ahead, Mark.
perspective on that, just to add, is that, I do think, I'm a permanent hire and David's fractional and so on, but I like to meet eye to eye with founders and to really, either if they have a little plant that they make things in, I walk the plant, I meet the people, and we just have this sort of, we have this candid conversation about where their heart is and what their objectives are. And that personal immersion develops what I would call a spec sheet. Sounds awfully formal, right? But it's the skills that you need, your planning, and then what kind of culture do you have, or what kind of culture do you want to create? And then I go out and I tell the story to the candidates or uncover if there's a true match. I had a search of a manufacturing operation recently where I went, I drove 4 or 5 hours and I met with the founder. I walked the plant in this particular manufacturing environment, had this like unbelievable camaraderie that I have never seen before. And the founder took such pride in that. I was able to really recognize that as a key thing that he was looking for. And I could find that the candidate that not only had the skill, but would embrace that. So it's an immersion and development of specific specifications, including culture fit, and then you got to go find it. And you got to, and you have to uncover it, by the way. Yeah, you can't, with questions and dialogue, you have to uncover really how a candidate feels versus what he says on a piece of paper.
So next, I want to invite up Tanya to ask a follow-up question, I think, to some comments that you had, Mark, on questions in finding that right candidate. Tanya, are you able to come off of mute and ask that?
Sure. You answered a bit of that already, Mark, but just to add on to that, one place I think a lot of small emerging brands are at is everyone is kind of a jack of all trades, or you want everyone to be a jack of all trades. It's a bit of a roller coaster. You've got highs and lows, and the business fluctuates regularly. It can be kind of scary for new hires. I'm wondering, what are the hard questions to ask let's say a higher up hire, to determine if they are the right fit for that culture, and that you can rely on them for the long term. I've found some people nowadays, well, actually many are candidates that are interviewing, very good at telling you what you want to hear. How do you get through that? How do you really figure out like if they're the right fit, and what are the hard questions to ask?
And not to dodge that, but every situation's different and so on.
Yeah.
But the best, that's what I do, right? And there's techniques, and there's a process over time, and there's a screening, and it's quite it's quite extensive. But I would start out by saying, some people find it scary. You have to find someone that is excited with the uncertainty, that is excited with the challenge of overcoming obstacles every 10 minutes, not, again, tolerating it. There are people out there that just love, I'm being one of them. I have a genetic mutation for loving complexity. The more complex, the more excited I am about something, right? And the way you determine that beyond saying, besides those words, is what have you done in the past? Give me an example of how you have handled a situation where that was extremely frustrating and you had limited resources. What did you do? Did you go, I did the best I could? Or did you say, hey, I took control of the situation, I solved it, here was the outcome, and I was delighted, right? So, there's a process, there's professional interviewing techniques with this, but I think if you're just gonna know, you have to, we could talk offline about this some more,
Yeah,
about it, but there's a way to do it, and it's not scary to people that love it.
that's great. Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
And Jordan, I'd just like to chime
Yeah,
in on
David.
that because I've, been through so many interviews, and I think, one simple way to see if they have the mettle is to frame a question around, a situation that really frustrated you, maybe that you didn't solve, frustrated the team, and see how they react to that. And probably that's about some kind of failure. And so the latter in that more general is, tell me about that failure and how did the team react? How did you react? What was the result? And I think that can get to the mettle of a person.
That makes a ton of
agree.
sense.
And I think, we live in very, uncertain times where change is constant for everyone. And if you make the right hire in senior leadership, at least, you can, I use this expression thrive versus survive in uncertainty. Because there are plenty of times, as when I was a founder, where we had uncertainty, where I had a team that all collectively worked together in challenges, and we're all thrivers, not survivors. And we got together and we did it, and we all enjoyed it, and we conquered it. And I didn't feel alone as a founder. But but each hire, this is where, hiring people as an asset class, to use a formal expression, versus, we go after money to invest in equipment or sales staff or so on. The investment in people, and whether you use a search firm or not is your decision, but the investment is, if you invest and you find the right person, they affect the whole organization. It's a tremendously wonderful thing to do right.
One thing that in you talking reminds me of is this idea that every relationship is based off of expectations and communication. And it's usually when one of those is off for either party that things end up going sour. And my wife is an HR leader and she did hiring for a startup. And one thing that really struck me was that as she was interviewing candidates, she would tell them almost undersell the job in terms of the complexity, right? She'd actually like, hey, this team does not have any process. They are struggling in these areas. And so if you join, I want to make sure you're clear that like these are the challenges that you will deal with on a day-to-day basis, so that they know kind of front hand if that's an environment they will want to work in or not. And tells you a lot about a person if they follow up and like, oh yeah, like things are going poorly and things aren't working. Yeah, I want to work in that environment. Versus I think as founders, we have a desire to oversell or what we hope to achieve. And then the reality is most of the time it takes longer and it's more expensive to actually get there. And that can lead to some disillusionment.
Agreed. Agreed.
Yep.
Yeah, if you have a
So what I want,
plan and
go ahead,
you're
Mark.
honest and direct with people about it, and people know that it's not easy. And if you're honest and direct about your plan, your objectives, you communicate clearly, an ongoing basis, because another thing happens with founders is they get so busy with the moment that the communication skills, the meetings, the plans, they all suffer. And I myself experienced that a lot. I just think the more you become a good manager and a good communicator, it affects everything in a positive way.
Love that. So another question that came in from our audience from Jane. Jane, would you like to come off of mute and ask your question?
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, Jordan, and thanks for inviting me today. So I work with a portfolio of non-competing, non-alcoholic brands out of the UK. Before that, I cut my teeth in CPG alongside Jordan, actually, in Chicago with my own CPG spice brand. So I'm familiar with the US market and everything it has to offer us. But my question to you guys today is, well, I guess it's really around how can we shape a scenario or find a pathway where we can share a resource. So I have these 3 brands. They're all at different stages of growth. We have funding. So number one, we all have funding. We're working into the on-premise and the off-premise, so that there's 2 very distinct channels there, and then all around the bev alc world, and the regional laws and the state laws. And then, yeah, so those would be the 2 things really. And obviously the challenge is that they are all the other side of the pond, so all in the UK. So my question is around the possibility of sharing resource in those earlier hires, and what does that look like from your perspective, and the experiences you've had with hires?
David, you
No,
go.
well, I think that's a really interesting opportunity for, the potential leader. And I can see that being attractive to, maybe slightly higher than mid-level, large CPG employee that sees the opportunity to, be a CMO or a COO of a company that has, multiple products, multiple channels. I think that's there would be a lot of people interested in that role across, I think you said 3 businesses. That looks really,
Yeah.
really enticing for a lot of people that, are 35 to 40 with some big CPG experience and looking for, the huge challenge of multiple brands and channels, etc.
Are all 3
Okay.
brands have the same sales channel? I mean, I may have missed your description of them, but are they the same type of brands and the same selling
They
into the
are.
same channels, into the same markets?
Yeah, they are pretty much same region, same channels, on-premise, off-premise, potential for food service, definitely into grocery, and also the beverage alcohol channel. Even though they're non-alcoholic, there's still another channel there that's open to get into the on-premise. So yeah, it's an e-com as well. They're all kicking off in 3PL space. The non-alc space is really interesting because there's a whole different route to market as well. But
Yeah, we have someone we're working with on non-alcohol too. Yeah, to the extent that they're the same channel, the same concept, the similarities are close enough. It's, as David said, it's extremely interesting for someone because they can weave together a common theme. It's a very interesting challenge, and that has to be broken down into pieces as far as shared services. And it could be financial too, by the way. It doesn't always have to be CMO type stuff or sales strategies.
Yeah.
You have to do an evaluation of common and non-common attributes or lists so that you can just weave this together properly. But at top level, it's super interesting and it would be very attractive to someone.
Okay, that's good to know. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Perfect. Thanks for those answers. Next, I'd like to invite up Sarah to ask your question on R&D. And then also, just as a note to everyone who's listening in, if you have any other questions, feel free to drop those in the chat and help you to welcome you up to ask those as well. So Sarah, are you able to come off mute?
Of course, hi. So my question is that we are startup, we're pretty new, we're still pre-manufacture, and we're actually just going for pre-seed funding within like the next, I would say, 2 months at minimum. And I wasn't sure, so let me just go back a little bit. So we are still pre-manufacture, and I am in the process of finding a R&D specialist within like the food sciences field for beverages, and I wasn't sure if it's better to do like a partnership or like full on hire them as a co-founder, because I am more like a business marketing aspects rather than manufacturing. If that
David,
makes
this is
sense.
all yours.
Yeah, I think, if you don't have to, dangle the carrot of the co-founder and the equity, I would, forego that, and because there are plenty of, beverage R&D specialists that would help you develop and or commercialize a beverage at a co-manufacturer and not ask for equity in the process. And those same people, with 20, 30 years experience are more than happy to, kind of provide, pointers along the way beyond just the food science, because they've done this before, and it's just natural to say, have you thought of this? And those can be some good unlocks if you've never been through the process before.
Okay, gotcha. Because that was like my one concern. Because like I said, I don't really have a background, and I do want to bring someone with a lot more background within like the manufacturing side. But okay, thank you.
It's a perfect use of the fractional resources, especially that what JPG does. Doesn't have to be an ongoing part of your team. It's a transactional need, and I think it's just perfect to outsource that. Perfect.
Gotcha. Thank you.
Welcome.
And then kind of following up on Sarah's question, I'm actually kind of curious, what's your perspective on when to try to find an advisor to help your companies and that essentially might work or advise your company for free because they are maybe just interested in seeing you successful versus actually bringing someone on as a fractional hire?
Well, I think in the very early stages of your business, I think those resources are out there. There's, SCORE, which is the Senior Corps of Retired Executives. I mean, those folks are dedicated to providing consultation to, very, very startup business, right? Help you write your first business plan, ask the tough questions. In the case of the food and beverage space, a lot of companies start out where they're making food in their home, and then it elevates to a commercial kitchen, and these people from SCORE who are free can consult in that way, and and then of course we at JPG can do the same thing for a fee, but there are free resources out there that do it.
And I would like to add, because I was there, I'm originally making food out of my kitchen and before I commercialized it and so on. With advice, just be careful, right? It's better to have a couple, 2 or 3 different people to talk to, not just one, because you're at a point where you're learning and you're getting one person's opinion. It's just nice to have 2 or 3 opinions to have a check and balance to the advisory data that you're receiving. So I was fortunate enough to have, 2 or 3, 4 people that I would run ideas by, and then I could organize and challenge them. I could challenge my advisors actually and say, well, you're not fully understanding this, so just don't be linear and just get one person to tell you what to do and do it. It's like going to the doctor, challenge your doctor. It's the same thing, challenge your advisors and have more than one of them.
I think
And
that's smart.
I'll make the shameless plug, which I probably should have made in the first place, but at JPG we have an advisory where we create a cohort of founders that are then led and taught by a founder that has had a business, successfully exited, and the win there is, yes, it costs to be in the cohort, but the cohort is a bunch of founders, and they all kind of agree in the process that they will share their experiences and their wins with the rest of the cohort. So it's, you're in it with people who are doing the same thing, trying to grow business. Plus you have somebody who's been successfully done it and exited a business.
No, I think that's key. And similar to what David and Mark are both saying, I think as well as when you're looking for advisor people that you're talking to, get multiple opinions, and then also try to find people who are actively doing it now or have recently done so. Because as we all know, different business situations have changed. The way of doing businesses is constantly changing. There's some things that are constant, but there are some nuances that that are changing based on the time as well. One thing that's also changed the last couple of years, David and Mark and I were talking about this beforehand, was the hiring someone remotely versus hiring them to come into an office or working in person. And so, David and Mark, I'd love for you to kind of talk about what you're seeing in the market and how founders should think about that as part of their criteria.
Well, I think that, there are multiple studies out there. Korn Ferry and OWL have done the studies that the employee base in the US prefers a hybrid work environment, right? They know they need to be in the office with their colleagues at times, but they want to have the option to work from home because many believe that they're more efficient in that case. And what we are seeing is that big employers are forcing people back to the office in all kinds of industries, food and bev, tech, etc. And that is going against what the people want. And so I think for emerging brands who have not invested a bunch in real estate already, it's an advantage, right, to offer that remote hybrid work environment, because that's what the majority of the folks are looking, and that's how these companies, these emerging brands, can be advantaged versus your huge CPGs.
I'm seeing the same thing. Obviously, it depends on whether it's an operational role. If you're running a factory,
Right.
you can't do it. There's different roles, but we do also need the connection of being with each other and unstructured conversation. Knock, knock, knock. What do you think about this idea? You need this. If it's just remote and you don't build the unstructured conversation into the remote quality, you're missing out on a tremendous amount of information. So the creative person, and founders are creative, is how to weave that all together so that you can foster the unstructured conversation. But it is a unique advantage that you can offer. But I just, as from a founder perspective, you're so busy doing things that just make sure you find the time for that. How are you doing? How's your family? What'd you do this weekend? What'd you think about this? Whatever it is, just make sure you really pay attention to the actual person, the whole person that you're working with in some way.
Great feedback. Mark, I'm curious, and I'm sure you might see this as well. One concern that I've had from founders hiring someone who has, say, decades of experience at a large CPG company, there's a fear that they might be set in their ways and saying, hey, this is how it's done in the industry, and we should do it this way to find success, versus founders who might want to go against that, the standard operating procedure, maybe in a certain part of the business. Do you find that conflict happening as you're pairing people together? And then how would you suggest founders deal with that or ask questions around it to avoid it?
Well, I mean, there's all sorts of people out there that get stuck in their patterns, right? So it's been there all along, and the idea is to uncover people that are truly flexible, that are truly open, that are truly changing. And so, yes, I find that's what we screen for, that amongst other things. And you can challenge the person with specific examples in the past of how they've handled situations, or you can know their reputation ahead of time and so on. And this is the work we do. Shameless promotion again, back at you, but that's the integral part of that, is to really do deep dives into the person and understand that you need agility, resourcefulness, team building skills, and the person that's really stuck and doesn't have them will still say they're agile, and they'll still say they're resourceful. So how do you know, right? How do you know what resumes or sales documents, LinkedIn profiles or sales documents? How do you know? You gotta screen them properly, and it takes a certain skill. And leaders can either hire a firm like myself or learn how to do it themselves. But everyone's going to say they're resourceful, whether they're resourceful or not. So you got to look under the hood.
Perfect. So as we wrap up here, let me know if anyone has any last minute questions. But David and Mark, are there any questions that you see constantly coming up that we haven't gotten to today?
Well, I think one that we come up against, or an experience that we come up against in the fractional space, is the assumption that it's going to be a huge cost savings. And it can be a savings, but it's not going to be a huge cost savings because, I submit that you need to plug in, highly experienced people that in general cost a bit more than, a entry-level resource. And you need to do that because they need to step in and do the job without training. So you can't assume it's a cost savings measure. You hire fractional resources to get a tough job done that you can't do yourself. That's what you're looking for.
I would also say for me, the expression "it takes a village," it takes a village, and to build a village, you have to invest in the process of finding the right people. The cost of finding the wrong person is huge. The cost of and the additive benefit of hiring the right person is incredible. So whether you do it yourself or you do a firm, whatever your choice, it's whatever you're comfortable with. Just know that you're not alone if you build a village around yourself and you do it properly.
Perfect. I think that's a great note to end. So David, Mark, thanks so much for joining today and for answering all the questions from our participants. As a reminder, this webinar is recorded as well, so I'll be sharing out the link to it and we'll be posting a recap as well. And good luck with everyone in their businesses and hiring needs coming up. If you want to find out more about working with David or Mark or have any follow-up questions, I will send out and share their information with you as well. Perfect.
Thank you,
Thank you so
Jordan.
much, everyone.
Thank you for having us.